G'day listeners and welcome to another episode of the Scouting Australia podcast, powered by Australian Property Scout Buyers Agency. I'm your host, Sammy Gordon, and today, guys, we're back for another episode. And really today, what we're going to be punching out and crossing over is all about cross securitisation versus equity release and the different strategies that surround that. Now, guys, obviously coming through straight into a finance topic, this episode is in no by any means any sort of financial advice. We're general in nature having the chat here. We're just running through some options around cross securitizing versus equity release and what we would do as investors in that situation. Now, today, guys, I have the big guns, and the big guns are on either arm of Mr. Luke Teeuwsen. Buddy, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to be back.
Good to have you back. And in terms of the little guns, or the chicken wings, as I like to call them, Mr. Jimmy, mate, welcome back.
Well, I think anyone compared to Lukey has got chicken wings.
He's a big boy.
He's a big boy. So good to be back in the studio. And this is quite an interesting topic, actually, because it's quite confusing. I was asking you some questions earlier on, Lukey, because you're clearly the expert out of the three of us. So I thought...
You can't make a joke, laugh at it for 10 seconds, and then you get back. Just hurry up, mate.
I'm laughing at your reaction.
I'm just smiling at Luke.
Trying so hard not to bite.
All right, so Jimmy's missed his piece. So Lukey, we're obviously talking about cross securitization, aka cross collateralization. I'm glad I got that in one hit.
It's a long word.
Versus equity release. Mate, this is something that you in particular wanted to cover off. You get it a lot of the time in your strategy sessions, and you want to unpack that here today as to which route people should go down. We're going to talk about a few different examples of what people are actually out there doing at the moment, and where some people have gotten stuck. And I know you want to unpack that, where people have gotten stuck, and really trying to beat that. You know, obviously we help people once they get stuck, get unstuck, but beating that position before they get there as well, which is a huge part of it, mate. What do you think?
It's definitely something that has been common across a lot of strategies. A lot of people obviously have their own brokers, which is completely fine, but not all brokers are the same when it comes to sort of investment properties and even just the structures behind it. Obviously, they have their own opinions. They work under their own licenses. So this is no mean saying they're wrong or anything like that. They have their own ways of doing things. But cross securitization or cross collateral, right?
I got it! He stuffed it. Cross what?
I think securitization sounds a bit easier.
Definitely not. Definitely not. So you got me the other week on the mate on the 40%.
He's 100% keeping that.
I'm 100% keeping that 40%.
He doesn't forget anything.
He doesn't. It's like an elephant, long memory. But in terms of how it works, basically with properties and people going to buy a second property, the most common example is people with their own home.
Yes.
So they might have their own home. Obviously, the market shift a little bit. They have a bit more equity in that property. And then they go, oh, well, what are we going to do with that equity? And they go to their broker and they say, perfect, I can actually get you another property and you won't have to put a cent into it. Which is that we get that
and
a lot.
They're like, what?
They're like, we can buy another property with nothing paid? And the answer is generally yes. So the way banks do that and the way generally brokers sort of broach that topic or sell it to people is obviously no cash down, which seems sort of appetizing to a lot of people.
100%.
But what they're actually doing is taking security of your own home, your PPOR, and using that as security for the investment property. So instead of actually putting in a small deposit, maybe 10, 12, 20%, they're actually taking security of an entire asset. So
and a lot of the time they're actually doing like 105% lend. So let's say you've got the entire purchase price plus stamp duty and legals and whatnot as well. A lot of the time the broker will put that into the loan. So essentially you're borrowing that property at 105% lend and they're taking security against the primary residence. Man, we'll dive into a second all the technicalities around it, but I'm just curious. I was just thinking about this as we were starting talking about it. Like, what do you think is the ratio of people you've either seen come through with the pre-approval or they're going through that pre-approval phase at the moment, or they've already got a property in the portfolio cross-securitized against their primary residence? What would you, obviously we both do strategies within the business, like how many, what would the percentage be, would you think? 40, 60?
I think it's 50.
50?
I reckon it's probably half. But
Really?
Purely because
Holy shit.
it's actually something I'm seeing quite often.
Wow.
And it's not so much, it's not to say people have done the wrong thing. It's just the advice they had at the time.
Yeah.
So, and I have that conversation with people. Well, how about we take a step sideways and get the structuring done correctly, which obviously correct or not, we'll discuss that in a second. But we generally take a step sideways and say, well, hey, what are you trying to achieve from the portfolio? Where are you trying to go? Well, hey, that structure or what you're trying to do may not be best for what you're trying to do long term. It may be all right for starting out, but if this is what you actually want to get to, it's going to be very hard to get there with what you're doing now.
Man,
Jimmy? I was just going to ask you, for people listening, they're going, okay, I get it. So I haven't put any money down. Sounds pretty good. That's what they're thinking. And you're saying, well, they're securitizing your house or having that as security. People are thinking, so what, if I'm buying a good asset, what is the risk? What's the downside of doing that? Like, what's the problem with it?
So Cross Securitising, basically they're taking security over multiple homes to secure those loans. So your two properties are technically joined together. So they're linked, and basically it's a big pot of values and debt. So you got the two values of both properties in the example that there's two properties and two lots of debt. So sometimes, for example, if the loan to value ratio of those properties or the pool of debt and assets is quite tight, sometimes, for example, your investment property, and like obviously if you use APS, you get in a good area and you make some equity, your investment property might go up in value. But let's say your own home's in a market that hasn't done anything or might slide slightly, that goes down 10% and your investment property goes up 10%. They're technically at a neutral position, which means they won't give you anything. Where we obviously will unpack in a second, but we generally like the properties to be standalone. So they stand on their own 2 feet. They're separate. You can do whatever you like with them.
So the reason is we want more options. By cross securitizing, we're limiting.
It's also keeping it more isolated and more individually kind of. I mean, it comes back to having them all on their own 2 feet, so you can run them individually, almost like each property is its own business. But you're very like limited to what you can do through that lender. A lot of the time, the only way to kind of get yourself out of it or get a portion of debt back is actually going through sale. And if you don't want a sale to keep moving forward, you don't want to sell to keep moving forward, you could be stuck because you may not be able to, like in the current interest rate environment we've got now, actually refinance that debt off or refinance a certain amount of capital out or get any sort of funding. You know, you might be able to get funding with a different lender for another purchase, but you can't equity release the cash out of the deal because as Luke's saying here, maybe you've got something in an expensive market as a primary residence and that value's gone down, even though you might have one or two investments that have gone up. But exactly like he's saying there, it's like a pool, you know, so they're pooling that whole thing together. And so that comes to both debt and it comes to values. And it's just too much of a kind of like convoluted, conjoined sort of, you know, it's literally your whole portfolio, whole OVR coming into equation. And that can really slow you down in the early piece. You should be getting every property on its own standalone loan and pushing it through from that perspective. And the thing that I find really interesting, I didn't see this for years. Like when I first started in business, and it had been a big thing like 10 years ago or something, and I hadn't seen this probably in my first like 3-4 years in the business. And it's only been in the last like 12 to 18 months, this has really started to be creeping back in. And it's been really like interesting to watch it coming back in. It literally just went off the table for ages. I don't know if brokers is getting a bit lazier because it's an easier way for them to kind of do everything. They can plug it all in together into one loan. They get paid one big lump sum amount, and it's an easier way of doing it, or what the equation is. But yeah, it's been interesting, and that's why I find it funny that you say, Lukey, that you're seeing maybe around literally 50% in terms of what's kind of coming through, because obviously, we do different strategies within the business. I these days I take more of the high level guys that are getting more complex in their strategies, and I'm working through the way that they can keep building their portfolio as well to make sure they keep building it right. But obviously, Lukey is working with a lot of the front end guys now as well, from the say 0 to 3 properties and helping them build in that right way. But it doesn't surprise me that you're seeing a vast amount of people coming through with that, because they might have their primary residence and maybe they're coming into 1-2 deals sort of thing. And the easiest way for the broker to set it up if they're not working with one of ours is go, mate, we'll just slap everything. Don't worry about the equity release. It'll be the easiest thing ever. We'll just slap everything against their primary residence. And they just, it can also create a bit of a domino effect. If you ever had any sort of serious issues, they're all handled by that one lender, which is an issue, which is a problem.
Can I also say, because this reminds me of the first property I bought, Remember when I bought that property from that buyer's agent, 10Ks north of Brisbane?
Yeah. Your favourite.
He cross securitized that with the first loan that I had.
The broker did.
The broker did. The reason being because I didn't have a primary place of residence then, but when I sold the place in Ormo, instead of me getting the proceeds for that money, the bank made me reduce the LVR on the investment property. And I was like, where's all the cash? And he goes, no, sorry, we're going to pay this down. I was thinking, what a wait. My situation didn't improve.
Another way that they do it is they actually, like, let's say there's $100K you need to either pay down on the loan. Sometimes they'll just put it in a bank account and lock it.
Yeah.
And it's basically the cash is the security.
And this is the thing, you're very, very exposed to one lender and their policies and their way of doing things. And it's a lot of mainstream lenders that are very easy to work with at the very start. They do it because it's a very simple, easy process. People don't have to go through the right process in my mind of building the portfolio out right. It's kind of like that quick cheat sort of option, both from a broker and for an ease of perspective for a client. But it can be very hard to kind of unwind yourself from that situation as well. It's a very tricky thing to get yourself into.
Is it, and I'm not picking holes in the brokers, right? But if you've got a property A and they're about to buy you an investment property and they want to cross securitize them, a broker makes their money or trailing income on the amount of lending, right?
Yeah, of course.
So it's in their interest to cross securitize because they're going to get a higher fee. Is that fair to say or not? Really?
Not so much because the loan amount's the same amount. Really, it's
a percentage of the debt. So it might be like 0.07%, like 0.7% that they get of the total balance. So on $1 million loan, it's still the same percentage.
Okay.
So it's not that. It's more the ease of access and more the ease of it's the easy way to do it.
Yeah, that's the thing. If they can punch that loan out heaps quicker, they don't have to do a small equity release. They don't have to do a smaller loan for purchase as well. It's a much easier way for them to do it from that end.
Okay.
If we move on to that just for now, and because we're doing the verse, right? So we're doing case by case. We've obviously talked for 10 minutes now, essentially on the cross securitization. Luke, you talk us through, in layman's terms, mate, around, just for Jimmy's ease of understanding, mate, around equity release and going down the equity release option instead of cross-securitizing. Let's give that example of, let's say you got a primary residence. For really easy numbers, $1 million it's worth. You've got $600,000 debt on it. And, what's the case here? Run us through that. I want to go buy an investment property or two. They're giving me two options: cross securitization on the primary residence or equity release.
Yep. So $1 million PPR, $600K debt. You want to go and buy obviously another investment property. Let's say it's $500K. Instead of putting cash down, cross securitization, they just basically
slow it down, mate. Slow it down. I'm working at your pace, but he's struggling. I can see the cogs whirring, the old wooden cogs going. I can hear them crunching from here.
So cross securitization, they'd basically just use your $1 million PPR as security for your investment property, however much that is. Equity releasing is actually sort of obviously at APS, that's what we prefer. And that's basically where your $1 million property with $600,000 debts, let's say you needed $100,000 to go and use as a deposit, to pay stamp duties, to pay sort of closing costs on your investment property. Now, where does that $100K come from? Obviously, it's very hard for people to save large chunks of money, especially in obviously high inflation environments. But equity release is basically pulling equity out of your property. So $1 million property, $600K debt. Let's say you pull $100,000 equity. It'd be lovely if they just gave you that $100K for free and they didn't do anything else. So they give you that $100K,
which is a common
very common
thinking,
misconception.
Right? Yeah, very common misconception of the early investor. I remember I did on my first deal.
They
I
just
didn't
give
understand
me free equity.
Yeah, I was like, oh, don't I just get it? You know what I mean? And it's just like a weird, because I'd ask him, and I remember speaking to the broker, and he's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, this is my cash, and this is my money. And they're like, yeah, but it needs to be a loan. There needs to be a loan attached to it, you want to borrow that money, you need to pull that back out.
So exactly what you just said. It has to be a loan. So your debt on from 600K would then go up to 700K, but they would give you 100K cash. So that 100K you can obviously go and people go and use it for silly things like boats and cars and all sorts of things. But obviously that 100K is generally best used for things like an investment property, where that will cover your deposit, your closing costs, your stamp duties, all your sort of out of pockets.
One thing I'd suggest on that as well, suggestion, Jimmy, not advice, SG suggestion would be to equity release it and keep it separate from the balance loan. So let's say the loan's $600,000 and you're raising it to $7,000. I wouldn't be raising the bulk of the loan to $700,000. Me personally, the way I would do this potential suggestion is to then get a $100,000 top-up loan as a separate loan. Or if you're looking to potentially do a couple of investments, maybe you'll raise, $600,000 to $1 million is a 60% LVR. Maybe instead we raise it to an 80% LVR and we take out a $200,000 equity release from a 600 to 800. But we have it as a separate loan amount. And keeping it as a separate loan amount, and let's say we use that purely for investing, now we have a level of debt on the primary residence that is now tax deductible. And so we can, because we're using it purely for investment purposes, we're not buying the boats or the jet skis or the new wheels for the cogs in the head. We're buying it purely for we're borrowing it purely for investment perspectives, and then it's tax deductible. And then you can use that entire amount and use all those funds for closing costs, deposits, buyer's agents fees.
Well, that's a
all the costs
question too.
involved.
A lot of clients say, "Hey, can I use an equity release to pay things like a buyer's agent fee, etc.?"
100%.
It's
an investing
exactly
expense.
So that's why I wanted it to be in the podcast. We
Yeah.
definitely can, because technically it's cash. They will give you $100K, and obviously you'll have that your loan on your home, but you can use that for whatever you need it for.
Just on that, just for people listening, that 600 on your house.
Yes.
Just to clarify for everyone, that isn't tax deductible.
No.
But the 200 that you're taking out, and I believe you were referring to a split loan. Is that what you?
Yeah, it's an equity release top-up loan, separate loan.
So it's a separate loan. The 200 then becomes tax deductible because that is what's going to be used for the property B that you can actually buy. So for people not to think, it all of a sudden comes tax deductible.
I got $200K for free.
Nothing. Your house,
it's obviously what you're using it for. And obviously putting it into this scenario, that is investment debt, because the purpose of that cash being released is for investing purposes. That is the $200,000 is investing debt. The $600,000 is still the primary residence, your personal debt against the primary residence, not tax deductible.
Now, my question though, Lukey, so when you're cross securitizing, you're generally with the same bank, right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Now, can you do an equity?
What do you mean generally with the same bank?
You are.
You have to be with the same bank.
You are with the same bank. But if you were doing an equity release, right? Let's just say you're with CBA, you got your $600,000 loan, but you want to draw out the equity, the 200, and you're going to do another loan with CBA, right? So you use that 200. So you're still using the same bank, but it's just the structure of it is different. Is that correct?
You don't have to use the same bank though.
No, you don't have to.
You have to for the equity release.
The equity release.
But for the purchase, you can go somewhere else.
No, I get that.
And this is where a lot of the time the strategy can work really well. Let's say you go down a bread and butter route and you rack up a few bread and butters, or you equity release from the primary residence, you rack up a couple of bread and butters, and then you strip the equity back out of those deals and take that equity to a different lender that maybe has additional servicing for you.
Yes.
Maybe you can get some construction lending or something. We can start doing a manufactured cash flow to keep the servicing going strong, but it serves its purpose in that early point. But they're all on standalone loans.
Yes.
So they don't come into the equation when you go to purchase something else. Like they're out of the equation.
I think I get that. Just for the clarity for people, you can
he's struggling.
You can still get a loan with the same bank, but without cross securitizing.
Correct.
Is what I'm trying to clarify.
100%.
So
they're not confused.
Yeah, you definitely can. But the best thing is they stand alone. So if you get to a point where one isn't giving you the sharpest rate, or there's another bank that comes out with a great product, great interest rate, great everything, you can refinance one of those properties to that other bank and keep one with it. And like we commonly talk in strategies all the time, there's different tiers to lending.
Yes.
You have your tier 1s, tier 2s, tier 3s, and although some of them merge in a little bit, you very much have banks that are better in certain circumstances. That some have better risk tolerances, some have better policies about revaluations and equity releases, etc. So we play that game from a strategy point of view as well. So we generally will start higher up the tree if possible, so that we can have those really good revaluation policies, equity releases, and that's exactly what we're talking about, being able to equity release from those initial purchases with your tier 1s or tier 2s, and then use that equity to potentially go and keep building the portfolio elsewhere. But we're not locked into anything.
I love that, because for people with their broker might be saying, "Oh, we're going to use the same bank. We'll just securitize it together. It'll be fine." But now getting them more educated that, no, hold on a minute, I don't want to securitize them. We can still use the same bank.
If a broker ever says that to you, for listeners out there, easiest question to ask them, Scott, it's funny you say that. Do you mind if I just ask, how many portfolios have you built of 10 plus properties with this strategy? And wait for them to speak, because they're going to say none. You can't build a portfolio of properties. Like once you cross securitize a big bunch of stuff, all right, maybe if you're $1 million income earner and you cross securitize 10.
Super rare, but.
Yeah, it's super rare, like minute percentage.
Yeah, you got less options, right?
100%, but you're locking yourself into one lender, and that's what you never ever want to do. No. So you want to keep your options open. I guarantee you a high quality broker will never put you down this route.
Yeah.
So,
and you don't want the bank to call on your loan. I mean, who knows? If you're in your own business and they've got line of sight of everything, and then they might call on your loans because they see that you're struggling. Yeah. If you weren't cross securitized, it's going to be very difficult for them to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, so, that's a very interesting point.
And also, just from an accounting perspective, the reason why you would have the split loan or the top-up loan separate is because that $200,000 portion, is it fair to say that would be serviced by the new investment property? Is that fair to say?
What was that? Sorry, run through one more time.
So say you got the $1 million house.
Yes.
We've got $600,000 as the loan. We're taking out $200,000. That $200,000 is purely for the purchase of this new property. So that new property, isn't that new property essentially responsible for that $200,000 service?
It is in a way. In a way, of course.
Just from an accounting perspective, so that.
That's why it's obviously debt that's going purely towards investment purposes. So that's why it is also 100% tax deductible at that point as well, because it's going towards the whole thing. The one thing to remember with this, guys, is you are essentially in 100% lend territory doing this. But a lot of the time when you're starting out, like this is just what you've got to do. And as your portfolio builds out and your portfolio starts growing and snowballing in value, your LVR over time will drop. But this is a very important piece of how do you actually get out there and start building the portfolio properly. If this is what you need to do to get started, it actually is, it's literally the best strategy to do. Pull equity, use equity to leverage quickly to buy assets, and then let that snowball effect essentially of growth from buying in the right areas at the right price. That's obviously going to your net position is going to increase in terms of value, and your debt should stay the same unless you're still accumulating. So it's it's all part of the game.
This might be a very easy question, obviously, but for
likely,
because a man of the people, I'm trying to make it accessible for everyone.
I think most of our people are more educated.
You might, who knows, right? But can you just explain to people the difference between usable equity and just equity in general? Because some people think, well, my place is worth $1 million. I've got $400,000 of equity to use.
Yeah, correct. So you still have to have
apologies accepted. Go on.
Apologise for anything. You should be apologising for that haircut. Apologising to the listeners and the viewers.
Go on.
So it's not as if you can take. So if your property is worth $1 million, you can't just take $1 million out. So in that example we had initially, to keep it standard, your $1 million property, $600,000 worth of debt. You can't go and get a separate equity loan for $400K and have $1 million debt on your $1 million property. So generally,
they need skin in the game. Easiest way to put it is like skin in the game that still needs to be there of your own fat in the deal.
Correct. And generally that's 80 or 90% LVR, total LVR, loan to value ratio. So generally speaking, like you could take it up to 90%. So pull out $300K and $1 million property with $900K debt on it. You've still got 10% skin in the game. So, but usable equity is different obviously than total equity.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. And the one thing to note as well is like if you're gonna pay for that premium, if you decide to take that size of the loan from say 6 to an 8, you're at 80% LVR, no mortgage insurance, obviously lower cost of debt as well because the risk rating on it is lower. And in that scenario, all you probably need to pull out to get started is could be 100, 200, whatever. You probably don't need to pull to the 300. But for someone who maybe doesn't have as much usable equity, maybe they've only got, maybe it's a $500,000 property and they've got 400 grand's worth of debt on it. They're already at 80%, but maybe they might need to pull it to the 90%, which is 450, to get that 50K worth of equity out to then use. So everyone's in a different scenario. The important thing is the bank will always want to see you leave some skin in the game every single time. They're never just going to let you 100% do it and not take something from that side as well. But yeah, man, it's always case by case dependent in this style of lending and scenario.
And when you're releasing equity, and I know you've mentioned this before, in that particular example, if they only needed $100,000 of equity, would you tell them to get the 200 out and have it ready to go?
You're thinking back to the time I nearly beat your head off about 6 months ago. I called you a level 1 investor. You're like, why would I pull it out? Why would I pull it out?
Just wind him
up again. Okay, if you were about to get in a gunfight, Would you prefer to have bullets in the barrel or them back at the shop?
Mate,
Hang on, buddy.
Have two machine
don't
guns.
Shoot, mate.
I'd have two machine guns.
Yeah, it's mad to have two machine guns, but you don't have any bullets because you didn't strip
style.
equity.
You know Rambo with the
Yeah,
two.
Rambo's got bullets, but you're Bumbo. Dumbo?
So
Either.
so you would have your 200,000
Yeah.
available
Yes.
to use,
I
being
personally
market
would.
ready.
Yeah, I personally would.
But you wouldn't
Sitting-
go up to 88, would you, or 90%?
I wouldn't if I wasn't planning on 100% pulling the trigger and going that hard. In that scenario, do you need
If you
300 grand?
didn't
Do
need
you
to,
need 280 over 200? Like, I wouldn't do it. I personally would stick at I would stick at the 200,000. It's plenty of working capital. Go put the 200 grand into the market, get it working, make it produce a result. When you've got a result, you've got runs on the board, you can pull the cash back out of the investments and keep your primary residence at 80% LVR.
We've actually had a few of them recently where I had one the other day where he had some really good results from some properties we bought him. And, the brokers generally give you the option, hey, this is how much we can give you at 80% and this is how much we can give you at 88%. Well, what he could get at 80% was still more than enough for what he wanted to do for the rest of the year. So we made the decision to just take it to 80%. And then by the time we go and complete the strategies of what we're wanting to do over the next 3 to 6 months, with obviously in line with what he's trying to do, we could then come back and get those properties revalued and then take them up to 88% if we really want to start ramping it up. But with obviously some things that were happening, that was sort of the best option at the time. So it's a case by case basis. Sometimes you go and take all of it out, take everything up to 88% and have it sitting there. And sometimes that might not be.
I'm sure you'd agree with this. It always depends on your situation, what you're trying to achieve, and what you got available.
That's exactly right.
So like if you're scraping the barrel and you're redlining, but you need a red line to get yourself into, you're in property 1, you need a red line to get into 2, you do it. If you're trying to red line to get into 3 or 4, and that's just what you need to do because of your situation. Maybe you're a lower income earner, you can't save it, or maybe you make a decent income, but you got a lot of expenses. You might have a big family or whatever. If the best way for you to do this, or the easiest way for you to do this, is to strip as much equity as possible to keep building it, then for the right person, that's the right strategy. But some people might not be able to cop it or handle it or whatever from that end as well. It's always case by case basis on how hard someone's wanting to go, what they've got available, and what that end goal is that they're trying to achieve as well.
What's important to know?
One other thing I'll just quickly say on that, it goes back to what we always say about continual accumulation. And if you're looking to continually accumulate, whether it's, 1 every 6 months, let's say 2 a year or something, which most people have it in their mindset and their mantra that they want to do, if that's what you're chasing for, it's very normal to have to redline and push really, really hard at the very start. There's nothing wrong with it, in my opinion. Obviously, everyone's personal situation is different. So long as you can afford it, pushing it super hard and that continual accumulation at the start, the compounding effect that's going to have, it's going to be unmatched.
Yeah.
I know I talk about that a lot, I harp on a lot about that. But if you need to redline and really push this thing to keep that a continual accumulation moving forward, you're going to thank us in 5 or 10 years when you've done that and reaping the rewards.
With that as well, with the redlining, you don't necessarily have to use it all too. So we've probably covered off on it a few times, but an offset account. So you could pull out extra than what you actually planned on using and just park it in an offset account. You pay the same amount of interest whether it's against the loan or in the loan, but you've got it available there for you if you were to ever use it.
So that's exactly it. It's obviously once you use it, that's when you have to start paying for it. But if you don't, it's like Jimmy with his guns in his pants with nothing going on, and me with the revolvers with the bullets in the chambers. It's literally bullets in the chamber to be able to pull the trigger
whenever you want.
Yeah, whenever you want. You've got the capital there. There's actually a big reason I've done very well over the years is I've had that. I've redlined, I've pulled as much as I can to have it sitting there. It happened in COVID. I pulled it out before I started the business and before I left full-time employment. And I pulled out this big war chest. It's like, shit, I was like, I got something to go here. And then the market went dead because of COVID, and I had all this cash sitting in there. I wasn't paying anything on it at the time because it was all in there. But for me, it was like, well, here's a ripe opportunity. I'm hustling for deals. Don't really have any clients. There's these crazy opportunities coming. And I went bang, low doc lending, and smashed it and put all that cash into the market and got a huge result off the back of it. If I didn't pull that cash before I'd wound out work and had that sitting in there, the ammo in the tank, the bullets in the chamber to be able to pull the trigger, I never would have been able to get that cash back out because the lenders that it was with, I never would have serviced with. And so, it's just like a crazy example, I guess, of how that can work, of having the bullets in the chamber. You've got the ability to pull it out and it's not going to negatively impact you. It's one of those things. You're better to pull it when you've got the ability to than not touch it. Obviously not financial advice.
No, get it.
But it's one of those things. If you're in the right situation, I would do it.
A lot of people get confused with that, with the offset. Like you can pull out the equity, and I think you said it really well.
Probably.
You only pay for the interest once you actually use it. So if it's sitting there, if 200 is sitting in an offset or in your
and use 100,
it's the same thing.
Yeah.
But my question to you is, can the bank ever claw that back? Let's just say they give you an equity release. They can't.
No.
Okay, great.
Redraw is different, but that's a whole nother kettle of fish.
Yeah,
but I saw that a little bit over COVID, where let's say somebody had 50 grand in redraw. Technically, that's like a line of credit. So people lost their jobs and they went and said, hey, I'm going to redraw this funds out, and it was blocked because they couldn't service that extra debt anymore. Whereas if the funds are in the offset account, that is just like a savings account. It sits against the loan. It's not in the loan. Whereas a redraw it's paid into the loan. And then you're redrawing it back out of the loan.
Very important point there.
Both redraw and offset, if you had the choice, you'd choose offset every single day of the week. And obviously on a really good income, you're never really going to see that. And obviously COVID was a very special time in terms of seeing that. But I saw that a fair bit, where you had two people on really good incomes. One lost their job, one lost some hours, and then they couldn't service it. So they might have 50, 100 grand there that was their war chest, but they couldn't access it. So offset any day of the week.
Yeah.
Not financial advice.
It's very important. And you always talk about being market ready. And this is one of those aspects of being ready to execute. And that's a really good point there. A question scenario case for you, Sammy, just talking about being market ready and that consistent accumulation. In that particular situation, let's just using the same $1 million, we've got usable equity. Let's just say we're taking it up to 80%. So we've got 200 grand, but we've also got 200 grand of cash separate.
Yep.
What would you do? Would you use the equity or would you use the cash?
It always depends on the individual. And the reason why I say that is because, like if you're a higher income earner, and it wouldn't affect you that much by pulling that equity out, that equity is fully tax deductible. So using it and making those repayments and being able to write that off, it kind of could make sense in that instance if it wasn't going to affect you. And realistically, I would use the whole 400. I wouldn't just use the 200. But if you were you weren't on such a flush position and making so much money as number one option, then I would be putting the cash to work first. I'll be putting that to work. Like, yes, the other side's tax deductible, but in the current interest rate environment, you're also going to be paying the debt on that amount. So you're going to be buying at 100% as opposed to potentially buying at 80% plus closings that you're paying for out of cash. So it always depends on the individual. And that's why I like...
Just on that. So for people listening, because you've contributed your cash to the deal, obviously your serviceability is better and you're paying less interest. So if you're financially tight, then that would be a better outcome.
See, if this was me in that scenario, I would be putting the 200 into the market at 88% lens and I'd buy 3 properties. If I was pulling it out of the say the primary residence, because you're almost buying at 100% LVR, I'd probably split that into 2 deals instead. But because you've got pure cash that you're buying into with the 200 that you've got to work with in this other scenario you're talking about, you could definitely stretch that further and maybe redline that a little bit, because even if you're buying those at 88% lens, you're still not at 100, 105% if you're fully pulling equity and using the whole thing for it. So it's a different story. It's a case by case. And that's why we're not a one size fits all strategy. When someone comes in, we literally tailor the strategy to what the individual's situation is and what the individual is trying to achieve in what time frame, and we also tailor the specific deal to that person and what they're trying to do as well. And Lukey and I work very closely on this, literally on a daily basis. So, I think that's super important, because you get that part right, and then the execution of the property correct as well. That's how you win in property. You get either sides of those wrong, you're going to hit a wall, whether it's buying the wrong asset, obviously by not using the right people, or you do the wrong strategy, and let's say you cross securitize yourself, and then you might be done after 1 or 2 deals and need to actually sell to go again, which is not ideal.
So when people come to a strategy session, let's just say they think, you know what, I'm in, boys, I want to come and do a strategy with you. Should they have a pre-approval already in place, or do you advise them to find out how much they can borrow first before they pull the trigger and then have the strategy and then get the pre-approval?
Good question. I've had it recently a fair bit where people might come with a pre-approval, but they've gone to an external broker, and the broker has obviously
set it up wrong.
Set it up wrong, correct. So they've done the cross securitizing, they've got the pre-approval, and obviously that's a credit hit. So I've had the conversation with people a few times, well, hey, let's not take on that loan. Let's take a step sideways and let's get it done correctly. It's way easier to do it now than get a property or two down the track and, that be it. Let's do that now. It might take an extra few weeks, but it's going to be better in the long run in terms of taking that step. So in terms of answering your question, I'd probably say have a look at your capacity, have a chat to the broker about what they think you could get and what structures they would recommend, and bring that to the strategy session. Hey, my broker said I can get this, and this is how they were looking at structuring it. And I can say, and Sam obviously says it as well, hey, we actually prefer this structure because of X, Y, Z. This is what you're trying to do. This is what you're trying to achieve. The structuring they're recommending actually won't get you there. It's going to be a lot harder. So maybe you need a second opinion.
And coming with the plan in place before pulling the trigger can save a lot of heartache, because you can go, I've had this set up. If you're using your own person, I have this set up. Is this the right thing to do? And we can either quite easily look at it and go yes or no. And if it's yes and they pull the trigger, you'll probably have a pre-approval in 1 or 2 weeks. Most lenders are turning them around reasonably quick at the moment. So that's no real issue. But it saves you a lot of headache and heartache if it's wrong. And it saves you a credit hit. If you're working with one of our guys, internally, like they're one of the brokers that we recommend, they are going to look at it and set it up in the way that they know and that we know is going to help you build the portfolio correctly. It's a really important point. You get those first deal wrong from a lending perspective, and we have a lot of people come through and they're like, "Oh fuck, do you really think I should do it?" And I'm like, mate, we could just go, yeah, no worries. We'll throw you on the boards and we'll buy a deal for you, and we don't care because it's done. But that's not what we're like. And I know that's what a lot of other BAs have done with clients. And then they'll come to us on the second or third deal. Go, oh, I wish I'd heard about you 6 months ago, 12 months ago, whenever they'd bought this other deal. And then we have a look at it and go, mate, you set up wrong. And they go, oh, no one told us this. And it's like, yeah, well, like it's like we give a shit because we don't want people, we have a mission at APS. We want to retire 500 people by 2030. You don't get there by just, I'm just going to go buy 1,000 people or 500 people a property each sort of thing. It needs to be structured correctly to be able to build a sizable portfolio enough to get this. There's whatever the crazy statistics are these days around how many people only have 1 or 2 investments or they get stuck at that. It's because this is another huge reason for it. People get stuck from a lending perspective. A broker tells them they might be in their little midst of I'm on my little run, my little tangent at the moment. I'm buying all my investments and they might get 1, 2 investments in really hyped up. The broker goes, sorry, mate, you're done. You got capped out, cross securitized. We can't do anything. Can't release equity. Oh, but it's gone up. Yeah, sorry, mate, but all that capital's tied up because the primary residence has plateaued, and because it's worth 2 million, your investment's worth 5 million. I can't touch anything. There's not enough in there to take anything. They lose their steam, they lose momentum, and then 5 years later, they haven't done anything else. They set it up properly, build it properly, continue the accumulation, snowball momentum. That's where it starts to really chug and take off, and they build it the right way, and they reach their end goals.
And that's pretty common. We if you're wanting to buy 1 or 2 properties, there's really nothing wrong with it. At the end of the day, people can do that pretty easily. At half decent income, buy 1 or 2, and that's it. And they're happy with that. They hold it for 30 years, and
you can't retire. You can't retire on 1 or 2 properties.
Correct. That's it. But if you're wanting to build a decent passive income, a decent portfolio, it's very hard to do that on cross securitization. I had someone recently, they came from somewhere else, and they had 3 properties, and they'd done really well on those properties, but with interest rates going from 2% to 7%, and then tacking on an APRA assessment rate on top of that buffer, they couldn't refinance anywhere. Their current bank wouldn't give them any more, so their only options was to earn more, which is obviously hard to do regardless, or sell something, and they didn't really want to sell something. So it's one of those situations where you're stuck. So obviously you've got to assess the portfolio and have to sell something and make that decision to move forward. But it's a lot easier to not get to that stage.
Not get into that position.
Can I ask you guys, you mentioned something before about getting a credit hit. Now, can you just explain to people, you've applied for a loan, you applied for a pre-approval, but you haven't gone ahead with it because it's the wrong pre-approval. Are you still getting a credit hit? Like, what's actually happening?
If you're going for a new pre-approval?
No, because you said before, because they've already got it set it up and they're going to get a credit hit.
Yes.
what's the implications of that, or what's actually happening behind the scenes?
So everyone has a credit score, right? And your credit score is affected by what debts you have, predominantly like what debts you have, what those style of debts are, like your credit cards and your personal loans versus your home loans and whatnot as well. And then how many times you apply for finance. So I've had it before where I've seen clients, they went around and they shopped around with all these different lenders, banks, and they went and got a credit hit, and they didn't realize they went and got a credit hit at all these different lenders. And then when they finally decided who they wanted to go with, they hit the lending card that many times that they weren't actually able to buy because they had kind of red flagged themselves as getting so many credit hits. So it's one of those things you got to be very careful of. Yeah, man, it's all part of the credit file, credit rating system that they have on you. You got to be very, if you're wanting to do this and do this seriously, like I'm extremely protective of my credit rating and my credit file and all the rest of it. I've never had a credit card. I don't have personal loans. I don't have car loans, all that sort of thing. And I never have, literally never have. And people, you know, how were you able to build such a big portfolio? You know, a lot of people try and call bullshit on it. It's like, mate, never took out any sort of loan, any sort of credit card. Let's compare situations. Let's see our spending habits and what my bank account looks like compared to yours. Obviously, it's a bit different these days. I don't worry as much about it. My LVR is a lot lower. My portfolio is better. My income's higher. But when you're in the early accumulation days, it is a huge part of the game. And people wonder why servicing's so shit. And people are like, oh, I can't understand why my servicing's so bad. And I was like, what does your bank account look like? What are your credit cards? What are your personal loans? What are your car loans? All these different things. And a lot of the time, people think they're doing the right thing with pretty much everything. But then you go have a look at the last 3 or 6 months statements of their banking account of their everyday debit card, and it's a bloodbath, you know, like they're just smacking that thing every day, multiple times a day on everything. And all that stuff contributes to how that looks and how that reflects on them as well.
Okay. And you can get your credit, you can check your credit score, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
You can do that.
Heaps of places out there. You've got to be careful though. Some obviously you got to be careful because they will actually hit your credit to check your credit. But there's some out there that don't. But in terms of obviously your options there, the equity releasing allows you to build a bigger portfolio. It gives you the options. It gives you the ability to filter down through the tiers.
Yes.
Your tier ones are great for equity releases and revaluations, and sometimes your tier twos and tier threes are better for people that have businesses, people that aren't PAYG, people that have more difficult circumstances. They have bigger risk appetites and policies to suit that, whereas some banks do. So that also draws back to having good people in your corner, a good broker that knows good structures, that knows the ways around different things, because one, they won't hit your credit file every time they go and assess a different bank. They'll go have a look at 20, 30, 40 banks and say, hey, these are the 4 best ones for you. I haven't applied for the 4 yet. These are your options. Which one do you want?
Yeah.
And then you, like, by the time you go and shop around to 10 banks yourself and get credit hits on all of them, the policies have changed. You got to go back and do it again. So having a good broker in your corner and having good people in your corner is really important too.
Can I say one last thing about banks? Yep. And people think, you know, they want to just be with the big 4 banks, and they think, nah, because it's sort of almost like a pride thing of being with CBA or something. Yeah. The banks don't care about you. No. If you are getting access to funds, like I've used banks that I never knew even existed. Some of them I wish they never did exist. But my point to people when you're out there is you want to get lending. You can't accumulate if you don't borrow money. Yeah. So if someone's going to give you the funds and it's going to be a great asset and it's going to help your situation, then don't hold off because it's not with one of the big 4. Is that fair to say?
100%. Man, I haven't used the big 4 for 8 years or something. Like I used to love them. You know, a lot of the early phases of my portfolio, I used them for a bit. Actually, I used them last year with a big refi with someone that was very good in my situation and circumstance at the time. But there was about 6 years there where I didn't touch a major lender. But yeah, man, like it doesn't really matter. The big 4 can be good starting out. Can be. If
you did say that, yeah. Sometimes when you're starting out, they're nice and easy to deal with.
They all have different risk profiles, you know, on different things. And sometimes it's a serviceability perspective. Sometimes it's an evaluation perspective and reval perspective and all the rest of sort of things. And sometimes they're on different income, you know, or self-employed and all those different things. All lenders have different criteria that make them useful at certain times. Like my low doc lending and all the different, you know, real shitty 3rd tier lending that I've done and personal lending and everything I've done before just to get essentially money done to complete a deal or to purchase deals. There's all different reasons to use all different banks, but it should not matter who is the right one or whoever you wanted to go with. It's who's the best option to go with. And that isn't always rate. It's how they actually are in the sequence of your portfolio.
But some people turn their nose up at that too.
Yeah.
I don't want to go with that bank. I've never heard of them before, and obviously that can be normal too. But exactly that. It's about the finance game too. It's probably one of my most common sayings. If people have heard me on strategy calls, as much as it is a property game, it's also a lending game.
Yeah, it's 50-50, 100% finance.
We can't be buying good property. We can buy good properties every day of the week,
100%.
but if we can't get good finance and good structures behind that, it becomes very hard to do our job in the property side of things. So having good finance advice, good structures, good banks, and good ability there is part of it. But obviously the property side and the lending side go hand 100%. In hand.
Can I give you one last thing to wrap it up,
last
Sammy?
thing for a second, last thing.
Equity releasing it's a no-brainer, right?
Yes.
But is there ever a time to cross securitize? Because some people are thinking, is there ever a time that it would be applicable?
Look, the only time I would say, and Luke, you can let me know what you would say here. The only time I would do it is if there was no other option. And if there literally was zero any other option, if it was your only way to get in the market or get another deal, I'd still do it. Like at the end of the day, man, you do what you have to do. I took full shark money to finish a development in COVID. It didn't matter. Like everyone was paying in the twos, man. I borrowed money at like 13% to finish a deal. It is what it is. It's what I needed at the time. Okay. So if you have to cross securitize, if it is the only option at the time and it's the absolute last resort, then yeah, sweet, is what it is. But is it the first option? No, definitely not.
Okay.
And if someone's trying to push it to you as the first option or the only option, question them.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong questioning them. You want to make sure you're working with the right people. If you haven't engaged us or you're looking to work and accumulate and buy property yourself, is what it is. I don't really care. Obviously, we'd love to work with you, but if you're wanting to do it by yourself, be very wary of the professionals that you're using as well, because obviously what we do isn't purely and only about buying property. It's also the strategy side and having the correct team to help you execute. Having the wrong team and especially setting up finance in the wrong way, as Luke is saying here, you're already 50% of the way to failing at this game if you get that set up properly, because 50% of the win will come from setting up and structuring your finance correctly.
I think you nailed it, boys. Well done.
I think we're good. I think Lukey and I did, mate. We did well. Nah, pleasure having you on, boys. It was a good app. I think a lot of people take a lot of value out of this because I agree, man. There are a lot of people that ask this question and set this up incorrectly, and that we have to kind of work and re-strategize around as well. So, mate, thanks for jumping in and giving your views on it and your takes on it as well, mate.
No worries.
Beautiful. Jimmy, mate, thanks for having you on. I'm looking at me, Diggs, mate. Thanks for having you on.
Good.
Thanks for having me on, mate.
Great insight, Lukey. You did awesome.
No, it was a good sesh, boys. Good sesh. I think reasonably short and snappy.
It was.
But yeah, boys, good app. I hope the listeners took a lot of great value out of it. If you did, listeners, take great value out of this episode and either your broker's setting up for you, maybe you need to send this one to your broker.
That'll go down well.
It'll go down real well. Anyone you think could take some great value out of this, guys, be it your broker or family member or otherwise, feel free to send this one on. We would really appreciate it. We're obviously trying to keep building the community of people that are thinking, talking, and acting the same way that we do at Australian Property Scout and on the Scouting Australia podcast. If you haven't left us a 5-star review yet and you're loving the poddy, please jump on. Make sure you leave us that. We massively appreciate both the testimonials and the sharing around to all friends and family. Until next week, guys, that's a wrap on the Scouting Australia podcast.